I think I was almost kidnapped trying to buy a PlayStation 5. This was around Thanksgiving in 2020 and was supposed to be a day filled with joy, family, and gratitude. I was at my sister's house, where the laughter and smells of a traditional Thanksgiving food filled the air. We were sharing stories, catching up, and enjoying each other's company. It was one of those perfect family moments. Then, my phone buzzed. A notification from OfferUp caught my eye. A PlayStation 5 for just $300. During the PS5 frenzy, this was like finding a rare treasure. My son had been dreaming of this console, and I couldn't pass up the chance to make his Christmas wish come true. With an excuse about needing to run a quick errand, I messaged the seller. He was an older man, and he replied immediately. We agreed to meet at Walmart within the hour. I remember the confused look on my sister's face as I hurried out, promising to return soon. But the man never showed up at Walmart. Disappointed, I went back to my sister's. He messaged later, apologizing and suggesting another meeting spot for the next day. But then he canceled again. Despite the red flags, the lure of the deal was too strong. He finally suggested I come to his house, and I agreed, thinking it was still safe in broad daylight. The house was located in a crazy, weird neighborhood. The building itself looked abandoned, with peeling paint and weeds everywhere. A sense of unease washed over me as the old man greeted me. Inside, he showed me the PS5 on an old table. The box was dusty and worn, raising my suspicions further. When he left the room to get some paperwork, I noticed the photos on the wall. I guess he was going to get the receipt or something, I don't know. When he left, I noticed these weird pictures on his wall. People were all holding PS5s, but their expressions were far from happy. They looked terrified. I felt a chill down my spine. I considered leaving, but decided to wait for the man to return, not wanting to be rude. But I was desperate. He then led me to a small room to demonstrate the console worked. As he fumbled with the cables, a sound caught my attention. Footsteps in the hallway. He had said he lived alone, but someone else was definitely in the house. Saying calmly, I asked to use the bathroom, using the opportunity to head towards the front door. The footsteps became more distinct, hurried. It was clear I wasn't alone with just the old man. Panic set in. When I got outside, I was met with another shock. All my car tires were flat. It looked intentional. Without hesitation, I drove off on the flats, the car struggling and bumping all the way back to my sister's house. I told her everything, and we called the police. They went to the house, but found it was not empty. The old man was there, but the photos were gone. He hadn't technically done anything illegal, so they couldn't arrest him. Shaken by the experience, I eventually ordered the PS5 from an online site called StockX. It cost more, and I do mean a lot more. But I knew it was safe. That Thanksgiving taught me a harsh lesson about the dangers of meeting strangers from online marketplaces. The memory of that day, the crazy-looking house, and the haunting, now missing photos still stay in my mind. A constant reminder that you have to be careful out here. Back in 2013, I lived in a homeless shelter. I was 32 then, and life hadn't been kind. After losing my job as a cashier, things spiraled. Rent became a distant dream. So, I ended up at the shelter. It wasn't bad, really. They gave us food and a place to sleep. I was grateful, especially around Thanksgiving. That's when everyone's generosity shone brightest. The shelter had volunteers to serve food. Most were regulars. But that Thanksgiving, there was a new face. A young guy, probably in his early 20s. He was quiet, barely smiled, but he worked hard. One thing was odd, though. He always wore gloves, thick ones, even while serving hot food. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just cautious about hygiene. Days passed, and things started getting weird. The gloves guy, let's call him Tom, became more reclusive. He started avoiding eye contact. His hands, always in those gloves, seemed to fidget more. Then, people began to get sick. Not everyone, just a few at first. We thought it was a stomach bug going around. But it got worse. People were getting really sick, violently ill. The shelter staff was worried, but they couldn't pinpoint the cause. One night, it hit me too. I was up all night, sick to my stomach. I remember thinking I was going to die. In my delirium, I saw Tom standing at the foot of my bed, just watching. I passed out soon after. The next morning, I confronted him. He just stared, those gloved hands twitching. I demanded to know what he was doing last night. He didn't answer, just walked away. I followed him, my mind racing with fear and suspicion. He led me to the kitchen, to the large fridge where they stored all the donations. He opened the fridge, and there it was, the source of our misery. Among the turkeys and pies, there were bottles of some unknown substance. I realized with horror that he had been poisoning us. But why? I confronted him, my voice shaking with fear and anger. He just stood there, his expression unreadable behind those gloves. Then he did something I'll never forget. He slowly removed his gloves, revealing his hands. They were horribly scarred, like they'd been burned badly. He started to cry, telling me his story between sobs. He had been a chef, a good one. But a terrible accident left his hands disfigured, ending his career. He blamed the world, the people who ate happily while he suffered. He wanted them to feel his pain, to know what it was like to lose everything. I was frozen in shock, but then I heard footsteps. The staff had followed us. They saw everything. Tom was arrested. I never saw him again, but I still think about him, about how pain can twist someone into something unrecognizable. That Thanksgiving taught me a lot. It showed me how close we all are to the edge, how quickly life can turn. And it reminded me that behind every smile, every kind gesture, there could be a story we know nothing about. It's a chilling thought, one that haunts me to this day. I'm grateful for the shelter, but that Thanksgiving changed everything. I learned to look deeper, to understand that everyone's fighting a battle we know nothing about. Hey y'all, let me take you back to a crazy Black Friday I experienced a few years ago. This one made me swear off those midnight deals forever, at least in person anyway. I was 25 years old, standing in line at Walmart with my boyfriend, all for a good deal on a 70-inch TV. It was 7 p.m. post-Thanksgiving dinner, so I was still full from the sweet potatoes and dressing I had earlier. But I got to Walmart at around 7 that night because you had to be early. Otherwise, you'd miss out on all the good stuff. The people behind us were rowdy, cracking jokes that were inappropriate. But anyways, I forgot my wallet of all things in the car. When I left the line for a moment, my boyfriend stayed put, holding our spot. After I grabbed my wallet, I got back in line. As luck would have it, my boyfriend decided to grab some Xbox games just as I returned. Now, I was back in line alone, facing those guys who didn't take kindly to me getting back in line. They got an attitude, and my stomach did somersaults. The leader, a real piece of work, said, "Once you got out of line, you lost your spot." I tried to brush it off, playing it cool, but the atmosphere changed. They made it clear they weren't happy about me getting back in line. "Cutting in line won't fly here," one of them said. I guess he was supposed to be his backup or something. Honestly, thinking back on it, I probably could have taken the guy. Anyways, like circling vultures, they pulled me aside. "You think you can just cut and get away with it?" One of them sneered. "Dude, I was already here and you know that," I replied. My heart raced, regretting every decision that led me to that moment. I stammered, trying to explain, but my words fell on deaf ears. Just as things were about to get uglier, my boyfriend returned, sensing something was off. There's just something about that couple's intuition, meaning when something is wrong, your partner can pick up on it. The tension hit its peak, and I thought we were in the clear when we headed to the car after getting the TV. But those guys were relentless. As we walked down the aisles, they followed, taunting us with words that cut deep. "Think you're special, don't you?" one of them snarled. My boyfriend clenched his fists, ready to retaliate, but I kept holding him back, worried about the escalating situation. My boyfriend said things back at them like, "As long as you don't put your hands on me, there won't be any problems." At that time, he wasn't armed, but best believe it stays with us nowadays. I told him, "Let's just go. They aren't worth it." People who were walking by could see something was wrong, staff as well as shoppers, but no one said anything. It's crazy how we live in a world where if it's not about them, it doesn't concern them at all. Human decency, you know. The minutes dragged on as we went to the parking lot, the tension thickening with every step. They kept hurling threats, making the air feel heavy with danger. We quickened our pace, but they kept pace, like shadows in the night. It wasn't until we reached our car that we saw those familiar red and blue lights, and the police finally arrived, putting an end to the harassment. The relief was palpable as they diffused the situation. But even as we stepped into our car to leave, those guys were relentless, still spewing threats. "You're lucky the cops showed up," one of them growled. I personally thought he should have been arrested for making a threat. But hey, I don't know the law. We got into our car and drove off, so we weren't followed. The cop held them there until we left. And despite me and my boyfriend being ready to throw down with the guys if need be, I'm happy the cops showed up, because there's no telling how the situation could have escalated. Black Friday might be about deals, but it sure isn't worth risking your safety. SMH. It's crazy how you can't even go shopping without some crap happening. Stay safe out there, folks, and maybe consider doing your shopping online. This Black Friday left me with a story that'll make you think twice before diving into those chaotic crowds. Safe to say, I'll stick to online. All my Thanksgivings have been wonderful, but here's a fiction Thanksgiving horror story. Hopefully, it will give you a scare. The Haunted Restaurant by John Lance Jane, 2018. The evening of Thanksgiving Day had arrived, and Frank was driving slowly down a deserted city street with his wife Norma and his new friend Sam. Normally, that street would be bustling with activity all evening until well past midnight. But on Thanksgiving evening, the entire city resembled a ghost town, for everyone preferred to stay at home to enjoy their Thanksgiving feast. Frank and Norma had always done Thanksgiving at home also, but Frank had recently befriended Sam at work and had invited him to join them this year. Frank had learned the hard way that Sam had an allergic reaction to something in Frank's apartment, and therefore the three of them had decided to look for a restaurant to celebrate Thanksgiving this year. Not much luck, with most everything closed down on Thanksgiving. Until... "Look!" exclaimed Sam. "Up ahead! I see some neon lights still on." When Frank's car had drawn closer to the still burning neon lights, Sam exclaimed, "Hey, it's a restaurant. Lights still on inside. Maybe it's open tonight." With no other cars on the street, Frank was able to park right in front of the restaurant. He, Norma, and Sam went up to the restaurant, found the doors still open, and entered. A sign just inside said, "Please sit anywhere, and we'll be right with you." Frank let Norma choose a table, and she chose a secluded booth well away from the entrance. The three of them were the only diners in the whole restaurant. Frank and Sam started looking through the menus right away, but Norma took some time to look around the room. From her seat, she could see the cashier's booth near the entrance. Suddenly, she gasped and said to Frank softly, "Look, the cashier has no head. Shall we run and leave?" "No, that would be risky," replied Frank, also in a soft voice. "If we try to leave, he and the waiters will get suspicious and come after us. It's safer to stay than to try to leave. Besides, food is food, whether it's served by real people or by headless ghosts." Just then, a headless waiter approached Frank's booth and placed a glass of water in front of each diner. Startled and scared, the three diners mustered up their courage and resisted the urge to flee. Then they all heard a voice, seemingly coming from deep within the earth below, saying, "Take your time. I'll be back shortly." The waiter then left the table, and the three diners returned to looking at the menus. They were all ready with their orders, just as the headless waiter returned to their table. He seemed to know just when they were all ready to place their orders. After taking their orders, he startled the diners even more by bringing the hot, steaming plates of food to the table in less than a minute. It was just as if he had known and had prepared in advance the entrees that the diners would order even before they placed the orders. The diners did not question anything. Instead, Frank thanked the waiter, and the diners started eating. They found their entrees prepared and cooked just as they had requested, despite the very short time between the placing of the orders and the bringing of the food. They enjoyed an excellent meal, left a generous tip, and left the restaurant without incident. Still, they felt a sense of relief to be back in Frank's car and on their way. When Frank and Norma arrived at their apartment, Norma looked through her purse, looked around the car, looked through her purse again, and said, "I think I left my scarf at the restaurant. I guess we'll have to go back tomorrow to get it." So the next day, Frank and Norma went back to the restaurant and entered shortly after it opened. This time, the cashier and all the waiters had heads on their shoulders, as Frank and Norma sort of expected anyway. "Sir, did you find a green scarf in the second-to-last booth in that far aisle?" Norma asked the cashier. "I think I left it there last night." "We did not open it all yesterday," replied the cashier. "You didn't?" asked Frank. "Is this the Lemp restaurant?" "Yes, it is," replied the cashier. "And this is number 3322 on Demimel Street?" asked Frank. "Yes, it is," said the cashier. "But we were closed yesterday. Nobody could have left anything." Norma then interjected. "Okay, if I go back there to look for myself?" "Okay, you may," replied the cashier. Norma walked over to the table where she, Frank, and Sam had sat barely 12 hours ago. "There it is," she exclaimed. "My scarf is still there." The cashier turned pale with fright. "Why, that's impossible," he exclaimed. He then called the manager. When the manager arrived several seconds later, the cashier asked him, "Was anyone in here yesterday?" "No one at all," replied the manager. "This place was locked from closing time Wednesday until this morning. No sign of any break-in. Yet, this woman said that she had left her scarf here last night, and it was here this morning," said the cashier. "Impossible," exclaimed the manager, turning pale himself. "If anyone came in here any time yesterday, the alarm would have sounded and brought the police. That never happened." "But I'm sure I was here," interjected Norma. "I left my scarf by mistake, and there it was on the seat over there. It has my name on the name tag, proving that it is indeed mine." The cashier then looked at the pile of past bills next to the cash register and exclaimed, "Look, someone did eat here last night. This bill says Thursday, November 26th, which was yesterday, Thanksgiving Day. Party of 3. "That was us," said Frank. "We and a friend were that party of 3. "Does it specify the waiter's name?" asked the manager. "Yes," replied the cashier. "It's Ted W." "We don't have anyone named Ted on our staff," said the manager. "Is it possible that you had a Ted on your staff long ago and that he died and returned from the dead to serve us?" asked Norma. "I mean, we were served by a headless waiter and a headless cashier last night. Maybe they are ghosts that had worked here long ago during their lives on Earth." "Let me check our tax records," said the manager. "They go back 7 years." He then left the area and returned after a few minutes. "Yes, we had a Ted Warner about 7 years ago. A note attached to his W-2 form says that he was run down and killed by a drunk driver just about 2 months after joining us. So that must have been his ghost that served," began Norma. "Oops, customer's coming in," interrupted the cashier. "Got to take him to a table." He then left the conversation and went to the entrance to greet the new arrivals. "I guess we should leave too," said Frank. "We got our scarf, so we won't disturb you anymore. Thanks for letting us get it." When Frank and Norma arrived back at home, Frank logged into his computer. "Look here," he said to his wife. "Here's the website of the Lemp restaurant. It says that they're open 364 days a year. The one day of the year when they're closed is Thanksgiving Day. I guess those headless ghosts took over on Thanksgiving Day and saved the day for us," replied Norma. "They looked so scary, but I guess nobody will hurt us if we treat them with courtesy and leave a big tip. Not even a ghost." The end. I was on someone's kill list. After high school, many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple of months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple of months, and they offered for me to move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers, named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and anything of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust. Turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once, he told me that I was possessed by a demon, and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping, and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end-of-days stuff. That was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered, handed the phone to me, and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come to the station to talk about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go, still in shock and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were possessed. Story 2. Guy at a bar roofies my beer and tries to convince my friends to let me go home with him. Last night, my friends, my crush, and I agreed to meet at my favorite bar after work. I was a bit early since I got to leave work 30 minutes early, so I went inside and ordered a beer for myself. There was a huge, muscular guy with a long ponytail sitting at the bar, and the seat next to him was empty. He offered me the seat, so I sat down. We had some small talk, and he seemed nice enough. He just asked me why I was all alone and kept saying I looked uneasy and nervous and that I should relax. It was weird, but he had an almost empty bottle of vodka in front of him, so I didn't think much of it. My friends finally arrived just as I finished my first beer, and we went to sit at a table. I had 3 more bottles of beer, and we were having a great time. Whenever I went to the toilet, that guy from the bar was there, asking me if I was okay. It was pretty strange, but at the time, I felt just a little tipsy, and everything was all right. At some point, I started to feel sick, so I went outside to have a cigarette and get some cold air. The guy followed me outside and asked if I was all right. I was starting to get weirded out at that point. The bar was super full, but he really seemed to watch me all night. I went back inside, ordered a glass of water, and told my friends that I wasn't feeling well and would be going home. They all offered to bring me home, which I am so darn grateful for, looking back. I took a sip of water, and then it all just hit me. I ran outside and threw up. I could barely stand up all of a sudden, so I sat down on a staircase and kept throwing up. My friends found me a few minutes later and kept arguing about whether they should take me to a taxi or carry me home. Then the guy from the bar showed up. He kept saying that he lives just down the street and that I could sleep on his couch. My coworker, who is basically like an older brother to me, got really pissed and told the guy to fuck off. They forced me to stand up, which was almost impossible at that point, and somehow dragged me to my friend's place, where I went to sleep, hugging a bucket and feeling like I was going to die any second. This morning, I wasn't able to stand up for hours. When I did, it resulted in instant vomiting. It was 1 p.m. when I finally managed to go to the train station, get something to eat and drink, and head home. I'm still shaking and sweating, and everything looks blurry. So, weird guy from the bar, I hope we never ever meet again, and I hope you won't be doing this to other girls. Story 3. A man approached me and my kids in a deserted mall parking lot at 10 o'clock at night and started talking to my kids. So, this happened about 5 years ago while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night in a very safe city with a very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late, and the mall stores were starting to close. So I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finished eating at about 10 p.m. and left out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking guy starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot with shaggy gray-white hair and a faded flannel shirt and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him owlishly and shakily said, "Whoa, what?" He then said he was just kidding, and came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car, waiting for me to unlock the car to let them in. He then starts making small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if they were being good girls for Santa, how old they were, if we got all our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things we got, etc. He didn't seem drunk, high, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids on the other side of the car, just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets, and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking and trying to politely keep the situation from escalating by calmly and nonchalantly talking to him, while also trying in vain to find my damned car keys to get us out of there. They were in there, hiding well. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or gun or rob me. And my kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car. And I couldn't find my fucking car keys to get my kids into the safety of the car. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out, and she kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment reaction to this situation. Kids often tend to not recognize potential danger when they are with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly, and I was doing my best to stay calm, they were oblivious to the alarming situation we all were in, and being 9 months pregnant, and that I was no match for this full-grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed," and "It was nice meeting you," and telling my girls to say that it was nice meeting him too. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave weren't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts and asking them what their favorite school subjects are and how nice young ladies they were, etc., while I was struggling with the shopping bags and digging in my giant cluttered purse for my car keys. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay this situation was, because he was being friendly, and because of the whole "I'm with mommy, so I'm safe" child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for Daddy for Christmas, and started enthusiastically talking about kid stuff and asking him if he knew what Minecraft was, etc. And keeping this creep from leaving us alone by keeping him engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then, I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my keys in the mall, and that we were stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking over his shoulders and was showing no signs of walking away. And I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted, as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline start to spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops. And I felt like at any moment, shit was going to go down, as the gravity of realizing that there were no other people or witnesses around, and that we were totally alone with him. And at that moment, the odds were stacked against us, and that he had his chance. Then, he all of a sudden was all like, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later," and walked off in the same direction from which he came. It wasn't until then I found my car keys and unlocked the car and told my kids to get in fast. And I got in too and locked the doors and started the car and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it totally acceptable to go out of his way just to approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night, just to chit-chat? But being that nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked us how shopping went, and I said it went well. And my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was, and was kind of joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and I started making fun of myself by telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find my car keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm, and I assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was just talking and eventually left on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. He decided to go to business school instead of becoming a cop, and being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop for a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure that the reason why that guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with the kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me, to force me to cooperate, knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get into the car with them and do whatever he wanted me to do, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location to do God knows what. And being that he wasn't wearing a mask, suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the backseat passenger door, where my 7-year-old was standing by waiting to get in. husband then told me that the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took so long for me to find my keys. And the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. And that whole time, I was desperate to find my car keys, which, through some sort of divine intervention, stayed hidden in my purse, thus saving us from potentially being abducted.